Hey everyone, if you're a regular listener of the show, I hope you'll consider joining my Patreon community. It's a great way to support the show and get extra exclusive episodes, including Digging for Justice, my DC movie rewatch podcast. Bonus episodes are available beginning at the $1 level, you can cancel anytime, and discounted annual memberships are available too. Visit patreon.com/Anthony Desiato. Thank you to all patrons. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss the Superman movie serials, 1948's Superman and 1950's Atom Man vs. Superman, both starring Kirk Alyn, is returning guest and host of the KRYPTON Report podcast, Tyler Patrick. Welcome back, my friend.
Hey, thank you. I love coming back. I love talking Superman, and I also, like we've talked before, I always like talking the underdog. Just kind of mining or digging for that that treasure. Like you said, we're talking about the serials, and we got some cool points to bring up in our chat today. But one thing is, I was thinking about this because I used to be in a band, and that's a whole other thing. But anytime like you discover a band and it's like, oh, this is their third album, you're like, what? I always want to like go back and listen to the old stuff, and to me, it's like, if you're a Superman fan, it's like you kind of want to go back and sample the old stuff to just kind of get a sense of where this character has come from, how it was interpreted. And that's part of like going into the serials. I looked at it. For any Superman fan, I'm gonna say this: if you're a Superman fan, at least watch 2 episodes of the serials we're going to talk about. I would recommend, if you're only going to watch 2, watch the first 2 of Atom Man versus Superman, so you get a sense of this was a Lex Luthor type, and this was Superman, so you at least have a sense of where these characters came from on film, because this is the first filmed version, and I'm excited to chat about it.
Yes, as am I. Now, prior to this was the first time that I watched both serials in their entirety. So prior to this, I had only ever watched the first few chapters of the first serial, and I did that last year when we broke down the tellings of the Superman origin story across time and media.
We did the first 2 when I realized we watched the first one, and I realized there's not that much Superman. So we did the first 2 when we did this thing every fall. We would do we called pilot season, where we look back at just the pilot of different kind of film iterations of the character. And then you and I had discussed on a previous episode about Lex Luthor from the Atom Man Superman. And that's all I had watched of that one.
Gotcha. Okay. So yeah, so going into this, that was all I had ever seen of it. And to your earlier point, one of the things that I love doing on the show is closing gaps within my fandom, and this was definitely one. And I would venture to say that for a lot of Superman fans out there, this is probably a blind spot. I'm not speaking for everyone, of course. I'm sure there are plenty of people who have watched these and love them and own them on DVD like we do now, but I know this was definitely a blind spot for me for a while, and just the sense that I've gotten from talking to people and seeing lists online of the best Superman actors and not seeing Kirk Alyn even on the list, I think it's fair to say that this has become a bit, lost to time and a bit of a blind spot, even for those of us who love the character so much. So for this episode, we'll share our thoughts on those 2 serials and shine a light on this a little bit. And in fact, I know you did an episode on your podcast on Kirk Alyn, and you called it The Forgotten Superman.
Yes. I had 2 years ago, you know how time's been. I had the honor of doing an episode where I got to interview Jim Hambrick with his daughter, Morgan, who are the owners, operators of the Superman Museum. And at Jim's wedding, Kirk Alyn was the best man. He actually knew him. And one thing that he told me, Jim said about Kirk, was he says, "Don't let people forget me." And you can't see it, but maybe you can't. Okay.
I can see it. I can see the photo of Kirk Alyn.
Yeah, that's my Kirk Alyn representation. And then I have a poster of George right here. You can't see, because I try to represent every Superman actor somewhere in this room. And even my dad, came by one day and he saw my George poster. Like, that's the first Superman. And I was kind of, my dad's older, of course, but and I didn't want to be like, no, Dad, but he gets forgotten because the movie serials, like, it wasn't on TV. It's something that wasn't rerun. I didn't even learn about these serials. I'll be honest. I did not learn about these serials until 2006, watching the Superman documentary.
The Look Up in the Sky
yes.
piece that came out along with Superman Returns, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Because, they've not, maybe they've been shown on TV. Maybe. Like when AMC used to show like the old stuff, like the Three Stooges in the mornings. Maybe they were aired. Okay. I don't know. I just know they weren't streaming until DC Universe, which is gone. And we say this every time we chat, how much I miss DC Universe just for this type of stuff. The old and the rare things. And this isn't even on Tubi. We've also praised Tubi for Superboy. So it is something that you have to seek out. You and I both have purchased the DVDs. I own the Batman serials too, just because it's part of the history of these characters. Yeah. And it's interesting. Also, the cool fact is Kirk Alyn would later appear as Sam Lane in Superman the movie on the train, and Neill, the first Lois, would be Lois's mother, which started the trend of a previous Lois being the current Lois's mom, which I think is just an awesome trend. I don't know who, like, I don't think Kate Bosworth should ever play anybody's mom, but if we had to fit her in there, I guess she could be Bitsy Tulloch's mom, like in a flashback or something. But
listen, I think we found a little bit of redemption for Kate Bosworth when we covered Superman Returns. Maybe just a little bit.
I know you tried, buddy, but
just a little bit.
She is the bottom of my Lois, and she will forever be there. I even rank Leslie Ann Warren above her.
All right. Well, the fact that Kirk Alyn and Noel Neill would have that cameo in Superman the movie, that's one of the fun bits of trivia that I know the fans always like to talk about. And the other maybe sort of claim to fame for these serials is that, and we talked about this when we discussed the couple of chapters in that Luthor episode that we did a little while ago, that in these serials, when Superman flies, he is animated. He is rendered as a cartoon. Since they didn't have the budget and or technology to properly show him flying. Although in the second serial, you do actually see him physically flying, usually from the torso up. Sometimes you get even wider shots, but it's kind of akin to what the Adventures of Superman show would do. But they still utilize the animation for the longer flying shots.
One shot of him like in a wide angle. But they also, in the second one, and I know we'll break it down more, they did more creative stuff with the animation. Is they actually had one where he flies in, like, and he kind of like turns feet first, and then they cut to Kirk feet first landing. And it was cool to watch them back to back just to see where they did take a little bit more advancement. And then I was going to tell you this, I don't know if you've caught this or you haven't looked back for a while, but the other kind of reference to Kirk Alyn is in Superman the Animated Series. If you remember, when Martha and Jonathan find baby Cal and they take him on the ship, and then she's thinking of names, she goes, "What about Kirk?"
Oh, that's right. That's right. Okay.
And it's both, paying tribute to Superman who had come before.
I had forgotten that. No, thank you for that. So the last little bit of table setting is, what the heck is even a serial in the first place? So,
oh yeah, maybe we should have got that.
So
maybe.
Theatrical serials. So each of these Superman serials was comprised of 15 chapters of approximately 10 to 15 minutes in length each. And again, these were theatrical exhibitions, so they were shown at the movie theater. And, this was long before our time as moviegoers, but it used to be like you would make a day of it, and you would go to the movie theater and you would have your serials and your newsreel and some cartoons and your feature, and maybe it was a double feature. Like, you made a day of it. And you had these different things. I know, that's the thing. In watching these and in thinking about it, it's like, man, like that was probably a lot of fun. Like, you spent the day at the movies.
And then you had to go back next week to see the next chapter in this theater.
Yes. Yes, because at the end of each chapter, it reminds you to come back next week at this theater for the next thrilling installment of Superman or Adam Man versus Superman. So this was a thing, and I did a little bit more, just very light research into the serials, and I believe it was sort of like from the 30s to the 50s. And on the DVD, actually, there's a little featurette where they interview Noel, Neill, and some Superman and film historians, and they talk a little bit about how these serials kind of came at the end of that era, because now we're entering the period of time, that, the late 40s into the 50s, where TV is emerging, right? Well, so you're not having those serials the way that you were. So while these were very popular, this kind of came towards the end of that era.
Well, one thing was, when I was reading it, is Adam Man Superman was actually the most successful financially serial ever produced.
You know what? Actually, I had a question about that, and I didn't find an answer. Again, I did not do a real deep dive into this, so I apologize if I'm being ignorant. But because I heard that too, about how popular it was and how successful financially. I mean, my understanding was you bought a ticket for the day at the theater. I don't think people buying tickets for the serial specifically, or was it more just that the theaters were paying the fee to license it or whatever? And
see, that is baffling to me. Because I don't know how you would, if there were, there weren't multiple pictures, maybe 2 movies or something like, and I thought about that. I was like, man, I really wanted to dive in more of just the art of the serial, because technically, like, Three Stooges were shorts. They weren't serial because they weren't connected, and when I think about serials, I think about, the Batman serials, the Superman, the Shazam serials. And then to go back what you said, Superman and Adam Man was 1950. 1951, we get Superman and the Mole Men movie. Mm-hmm. And then 1952 starts the Adventures of Superman TV series. So yeah, I didn't even think about it until just now about how late these serials came. And then the other thing was, I got thinking about the way the serial like is done. Did they film it all and then chop it up in post? Because the way it connects and the way it flows and stuff, or like, where they're like, we're filming this scene today, or like, and from your discussion about how they even shot the Adventures of Superman, how the production was behind that film. So it's always curious to me to think about, especially like later on, as you start seeing where they're reusing footage.
Yes.
For certain scenes and shots. And I'm like, okay, all right.
Yes. I want to circle back to that because there are a couple of really funny instances of that. So these 2 serials, 1948's Superman chronicles the origin, chronicles Kal-El's arrival on Earth, his departure from Smallville, arrival in Metropolis, debut of Superman, and then pits him against the Spider Lady, the head of Metropolis's underground crime syndicate. She's trying to recreate this reducer ray that will allow her to annihilate any target and thus hold the city, country, world hostage. So that's the first one. And then the second one, Adam Man versus Superman, pits Superman against Luthor, who has this disguise as the Adam Man, and he has a variety of inventions, which we'll talk about. He lives up to his title as a mad genius. Now, I'll give my overall take on this, and I want to get yours as well. I want to talk about just sort of our reactions to watching these. So I shared this with you. We were messaging about this leading up to the recording. I am glad that I took on this viewing project. I'm glad that I've seen them. I really can respect and appreciate their place in the Superman canon. They deserve a lot of credit for being the first live action depiction of these characters. And in the case of Luthor, like we mentioned, a few episodes ago, this was the first time outside of the comics and the newspaper strip that he was represented. He wasn't in the Fleischer cartoons. He wasn't on the radio show. So it deserves a lot of credit. There's a lot about the Kirk Alyn performance that I like, other aspects that I didn't, and we'll talk about both. But it definitely deserves credit for its place. And I also want to say, the one thing I kept reminding myself of was, man, if I were a kid, a teenager, a young adult in the late 40s and early 50s, having read the Superman comics on the newsstand, and then I went to the movie theater and I got to see this every week. I'm sure this was a really, really cool. And I can appreciate that. All that being said, watching it the way I did, I watched the first serial over 3 nights. So I broke it up, I basically did 5 a night. And then I split the second serial up into 2 viewing sessions. So I think I did 7 and 8, I want to say. Or it might have been a little bit more unbalanced. But anyway, that's how I did it. So basically 5 nights to watch these 30 chapters total. And it was a slog to get through. I'm not going to lie. It was kind of tough. It really tested my patience at points, mostly due to the nature of the serial, right? These were very formulaic. They were very repetitive, very repetitive. And they were not designed, you said this to me, and this was a very good point. These were not designed to be binged. Yeah. These were meant to be watched, a week apart. You watch one, you come back to the theater the next week, you watch the next chapter. Maybe you don't see every single one, right? Maybe you don't get to the theater every week. So watching it the way I did not really set myself up for success. And so I think most of the quote unquote problems that I had, or most of the roadblocks to my enjoyment, I really think just had to do with the nature of the serial itself and the way I watched it. And the other piece of this that I kept bumping up against, and I'm sure I'll say it a lot in this episode, was it was impossible not to compare this to the George Reeves show, which, as the audience knows, I only really discovered over these past couple of years, but fell in love with. And in the comparison, these serials fell short for me. But, that's not fair to knock them for that. But at the same time, it was really hard to not have the George Reeves Adventures of Superman show in my head. So that's my overall take. What about you?
So as you and I had chatted before, I'm on an adventure. I started watching Superboy, and I was going to watch the George Reeves show, but I told myself I wasn't, because I wanted to watch the serials into Superman, Mole Man, and then start the Reeves show and kind of watch that progression, because the serials is kind of like, it's our first time doing this. How do we do it? And they're working things out. So I'm watching these. And like you said, I had planned initially to start later or earlier and do 2 a day, or 3, break it up. But then time got away from me, and here we are. And so I think I started Wednesday. So I watched Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then this morning.
Oh, wow.
And okay. I finished this morning. And yeah, some of it was challenging because they're not made like we are, where you would almost I think they could be edited to be a little bit more binging, but because each one starts with a recap of the last episode and everything, and the way they progress. And I told this to my wife, and let me grab my notes. I said, so I'm watching these. She's like, well, how is it? I'm like, well, this is how it is after the first episode. Ready? Superman shows up, saves Lois and Jimmy. They go to Perry's office. Yeah. Talk. They get some exposition. Something happens. Hijinks happen. The unknown people in suits get Lois and Jimmy. Superman comes in. Cliffhanger. Come back to the theater. Repeat. Every episode. I think there's one episode that ends where Lois and Jimmy are saving Superman. And I was like, yeah. Because I was like, holy crap. Every episode, Jimmy's like, hey, Lois tied up, Lois in the fire. I'm just like, like you said, it became so formulaic that I'm like, okay. And then I think they found a little bit more of their groove in the second one, because Lois takes on a bigger role in the second movie. Atom Man. And honestly, I will be 100% swear to the Lord right here. I recommend watching this just for the charm of Noel Neill, because she was my favorite part of both of these. I wanted to burn Jimmy's hat in the fire. And one of the funniest things happened when watching these. I told my wife, I said, Perry White never leaves his office. She goes, well, maybe there's not another set. I'm like, no, there is a set outside his door. And then literally that's the one episode that Perry gets punched and goes out of his office. And so I'm just like, okay, I was like, and once I step back, like, okay, if I was a kid watching this, how would I feel? You know, and like you said, if you missed last week's episode, starting with the recap, yes, because this isn't like, there's no way to re-see these. You know,
right?
Maybe a theater later on will show them, but it's not like now we are so blessed to be like, oh, I purchased it on iTunes, or it's now on Hulu, or it's on the CW app, you know, or hey, it just dropped on a streamer. I can binge it all. Like, you missed it. That's it.
I know. It's funny. I don't know that I've ever said this on this show, but I always cite this example, non-comics related, but there was this NBC show, Third Watch, in the early 2000s about firefighters, police officers, and paramedics. And I enjoyed it, and I would watch every week. And I remember one week it was the news cut into it, like in the third act of the show. And I never knew what happened in that episode for years. Because the only thing you had, I mean, was maybe if they played it over the summer and you caught it. But your point is well taken. And actually going back to something that we touched on earlier about its availability subsequent to that original theatrical showing, I feel like I saw someone commenting either on IMDb or somewhere about watching it on Turner Classic Movies. So I guess there was some sort of
I could see that later on.
Yeah, later on. I don't know, but I don't know how. I don't know what the earliest opportunity there was to watch it outside of the movie theater. I know just from Wikipedia that there was, I guess, a VHS release of these. I think in the 80s or so, 80s or 90s, and then these and the DVDs in the 2000s, and like you said, a short-lived stay on that DC Universe app, and as of now, not streaming anywhere. You might be able to buy them digitally on Amazon, I think, but don't hold me to that. But certainly the DVDs that you and I have are definitely a good way to watch them. But kind of going back to a few of the things that you said, and I guess this was what I was surprised by in my mind when I was thinking about how I was going to watch these. Even though I knew that they were chapters, in my mind I was like, well, just watch them in a row, because ultimately it's like one long movie. But it's really not. I mean, it's really far more episodic, but again, not in a bingeable way. But right. It's not. It doesn't really come together as this very smooth movie experience or
climactic end.
No. But to your point, I do think. I mean, not to gripe, but the DVD, if they had cut out the, this is the thing. I appreciate that it gave us the same type of experience that the original moviegoers had. I can't knock that. But part of me is like, yeah, if you had cut out the recap and the tease for the next episode, you would have saved a little bit of time, and you would have avoided seeing some of the same stuff over and over and over.
You know what I find interesting is I feel like with the DVD release, and this is not knocking them, but they didn't put a lot of effort into it. Like, there was no closed caption, which a lot of times I like to watch with that, especially when I'm taking notes to catch names or things. And, my buddy Brian is pretty much deaf. And so we always watched, a closed caption and everything. And that wasn't available on the DVDs. And like you said, part of DVD magic is you could pick an option where maybe there is a way to watch the whole disc straight through without you would just get the next chapter card or something. Like, you would cut out the, and that might help. But I feel like these were just slapped on. And, like what you say about Turner Classic Movies, it could have been back in 2006 when it was about whatever Superman stuff is, push it. And that really, that's one of the great things about Superman Returns' release was going to Walmart that night and seeing that stand that had all the DVDs of all the different Superman stuff that had come from animated. It was just overwhelmingly awesome. And, but yeah, it's, there's so many points in the serial where you're like, where is this going? It feels like they move forward, but then they back. There's literally times I'm like, I don't know how they got from point A to point B or who these thugs are. It's just, I have in my notes, dude in suits. because like most of them were no names. But I will say this: I caught this. The actor who played Bear, he's mentioned by name by Luthor in Adam Man towards the end. His real name is Wally West.
Yes. I did notice that in the credits there. That was funny.
I was like, sweet. But you know what I didn't notice in the credits was Kirk Alyn.
Kirk Alyn. Yes, only credited as Superman to create that illusion for the children that this was really Superman.
And that's what my wife was like. Just like when her and I watched George Reeves on I Love Lucy, he's only referred to as Superman, never as anything else.
Yeah.
So
it's funny because I was watching these late each night that I watched it basically. And I'm sure that had something to do with it. But between the late hour, my own fatigue, and the repetitive nature, I just felt like I was in a time loop at a certain point. Like I felt like it was starting to mess with me. I was like, what? What am I watching?
Well, and also because of that, they start reusing certain shots and footage and they go back to the same locations over. But there was a couple times in there that I was like, did I already watch this one? Because I watched them where it would play it and stop and take me back to the main menu. So I wouldn't get lost in my watching so I could take notes. So I knew I hadn't watched it, but I got that feeling of I've seen these shots, especially like I've seen these locations before. My favorite is the palm trees in Kansas, but that's, but yeah. So, I mean,
look, it is what it is. And as far as the recycled footage, I get it, but it definitely contributed to this overall effect. I think too, the fact that we were following the action from the perspective of both our heroes as well as our antagonists, it took a lot of the mystery out of it. I think that would have been a different angle if you didn't know exactly what Spider Lady's plan was or what she was after in a given episode, and that there was more investigating for our characters and us to do, which I feel like, when you dive more into Adventures of Superman, you'll see. I mean, there was a variety of types of episodes, but I feel like most of them, from what I remember, there was a little bit more of a mystery as we were along with Lois and Clark and Jimmy trying to figure something out. But here it's like you were in the lair with the Spider Lady, or you were in Luthor's space, mountain hideout, just as you were in the Daily Planet offices. So you were following the action from the perspectives of both the good guys and the bad guys. And you were following the exact same formula, and you laid it out brilliantly. I mean, that every episode starts with Superman saving Lois and or Jimmy from the peril that they were in from the end of the previous chapter. Like you said, they go to the Daily Planet. Perry gives them a new assignment. Spider Lady, or Luthor in the second serial, give their henchmen their orders, right? They're after something. There's some back and forth. Lois and or Jimmy ends up in trouble. And that's our cliffhanger. And it's like, will Superman get to them in time? It's like, yeah, I think he will. I mean, like, that's the other thing about this that, again, I really don't... I don't mean to nitpick, and it's very easy to look at something that's 70 years old and be like, why didn't they do it like this? I get that. But at the same time, we're a podcast. That's what we're here for.
We're breaking down with respect.
We're breaking it down with respect. I mean, there's not a lot of tension when you keep putting the main characters in danger chapter after chapter after chapter. So, it's hard. And the other thing too was these are all very plot based. These were not concerned with the characters' feelings or emotions or personal relationships. Like that's not the, what they were there to do. But so it's very plot focused and repetitive, and the stakes never really feel that high because we know they're not going to kill Lois or Jimmy.
In Adam Man, there gets to be, like I said, Lois becomes a better character and more of a character. She gets some great dialogue, scenes, even emotional beats with Clark. And that gets explored not as a romantic, but just as a friendship pairing of these two people. It's very one-dimensional for the most part, of just like, yeah, Chief, I'll go over here. I'll do this. Jimmy, grab this. Okay, Jimmy's in trouble. And the putting the same two people in danger basically is kind of like the same issue you run into when you do a prequel show.
Right.
Like spoiler, this is really not a spoiler, but like we're watching Kenobi and, you're like, well, he's going to be okay. Like, he'll be, because he has to show up over here. Like, he's going to be okay. And, that's the kind of the problem is like, you want to give suspense, you want to give stakes, but you don't have any of these tertiary characters or, other characters that you can just kind of use for that. It's like, will Clark save Lois? I hope so. I'm pretty sure he's going to. Will he save Jimmy? So it just kind of, like you said, you're like, okay. It was more of like getting like, how are they going to get tied up this time? Or how are they going to be all attacked? Like, let's get that guy over there. Chase him down the back alley. Oh no, he has a gun. Like, I don't know how many times they showed up in Adam Man's lair that I'm like, really? You're back here again? And then you're out.
Yeah.
I was like 15 chapters, guys. 10. Because you would think just by the way we're talking that you could binge it, or it's like the kind of mindset you do for a streamer, but it's really not. And so I'm sitting there thinking like 15 might be a little too long.
Yeah. And it really felt it. I felt each one of those chapters. I won't lie. And here's the other thing too, because again, going back to Adventures of Superman, virtually all of those episodes involve Lois and or Jimmy needing a save from Superman. But I don't know. I think one of the things that helps with that show is that each episode is a different story. Again, just the repetitive nature of this is that for 15 chapters, you're dealing with Spider Lady. For 15 chapters, you're dealing with Adam Man / Luthor. So it just feels like you're stuck in the same loop there.
There's more development in Adam Man because you have Luthor, like you don't know he's Adam Man, and like he even tries to play as a good guy. So there's more depth in that one. I was going to ask you, did you ever read the Batman Superman recently written by Jing Lee?
Oh, the Archive of Worlds storyline. I only read the first chapter because I knew it drew inspiration from the Batman and Superman serial. So I've not read the entire thing, but I know of it and I read the first part.
I highly recommend it. I really enjoyed that, and there's some cool twists and stuff in it and the way they do it. But yeah, the Spider Lady appears in it. And it was really cool.
Nice. Let's take a quick commercial break and then we'll continue. We'll be right back. Acme Comics is a locally owned and operated full-service comic book store in Greensboro, North Carolina for people of all ages and walks of life. Since 1983, this 9-time Eisner Award nominee uses their collective knowledge and resources to connect you with the best material available. They pride themselves on their significant contemporary and vintage back issue selection. Mail order subscriptions to new releases are available, and all offerings are available to anyone, anywhere via mail order. Follow Acme on social media and eBay, listen to the Acme Cast on all podcast services, and visit acmecomics.com for much more. Film lovers and filmmakers should check out this family of film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Point Lookout on Long Island, and In the Cut in Bloomfield, New Jersey. I was fortunate enough to have my work shown at these festivals, and I found them to be very enjoyable and well-run events. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals generally, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news and updates about events, discounts, tickets, and more. Also, be sure to listen to the Hang On to Your Shorts and Cullen on Film podcasts, available via a shared universe network. Fat Moose Comics is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Established in 1982 and currently under new ownership, Moose sells a wide selection of new and old comics from every publisher, action figures, graphic novels, posters, statues, and more. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you're in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. Flat Squirrel Productions is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP, that's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions, to save 10% on your order, and it helps support the show. Thank you. Aw Yeah Comics celebrates and promotes everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. visit them in person at one of their 3 locations, Harrison, New York, which happens to be my local comic shop, Skokie, Illinois, or Muncie, Indiana. If you have children and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow Aw Yeah on social media for more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Aw yeah. And we're back. So I just want to jump back to something you guys said before about Jimmy and how he finds himself in danger. I would say, I didn't tally it up, but I feel like Jimmy gets punched out in probably conservatively 10 out of the 15 chapters in each serial. Like one punch that just knocks him unconscious. And I know,
like the Lana Lang from Smallville.
That's the thing. Plenty of shows, including Smallville, people would have had brain damage, but it's like Jimmy in particular. It's like this guy just gets clocked and knocked out every day.
Jimmy, okay. My favorite part with Jimmy, and I told this to Ginny, I was like, he's like, Cub reporter, Jimmy Olsen. Okay. Homeboy is a pilot. Like all of a sudden they cut away. He's flying a plane. Then later they're like, Jimmy will fly you. Dude, if you're a pilot, I think you could be making a better living as a pilot than Cub reporter Jimmy Olsen, who's running around getting later. One of my favorites is Lois makes a comment to him about burgers and coffee, and he goes to get her burger, and she describes it. He comes back with burgers, no coffee. Okay.
Yes. I noticed. You know what? I noticed that too. Maybe because I was so tired watching these, I'm like, hey, actually, coffee would be good. What's the coffee?
But I mean, like all of a sudden, it cuts away, and there's Jimmy flying the plane. I'm like, what?
Well, what's hilarious to me is, and I mentioned this in various episodes, when you see how well funded the Daily Planet is in other iterations, especially older ones. And it speaks to how the times have changed. But, not only is there this company car that they're always using, but the Daily Planet has its own plane. And yes, to your point, Jimmy is flying. I'm like, I had the same thought. I'm like, this guy's a pilot. But then did you notice there was one chapter where it's just Clark and Lois in the plane and Clark's flying it?
Yep. I was like, wait a minute. Where's Jimmy? I was like, and I'm just like, maybe that's part of training to be a newspaper man back then. You had to be a pilot. Like, I don't know.
Maybe. You mentioned before the chapter, it's in Spider Lady, where Perry gets into the fist fight with the goon who they've apprehended.
Yep.
That was one of my favorite moments of the entire serial, is when Perry has this fist fight. Now, it seemed like there was a lot of stuntman work in there, because if you notice, like his hair seemed to get longer. It's like, right in front of his face. But I love, like, Perry really got in on the action there.
Oh, Perry was a very interesting version of Perry White, because he just, okay. So chapter 8 of Atom Man versus Superman, Into the Empty Doom is my favorite episode because of Lois. Because there's some really funny beats. I wanted to find it in my notes to tell you which one it was.
Nice.
That's my highly recommended chapter. Don't worry, at the beginning it'll sum up the rest of it you missed. So just pop on in.
I do want to agree with you, because I did find myself enjoying Atom Man more. I do think that it was better in the second serial. Some of these things that we're sort of complaining about, I do think the second one was stronger. But continuing along with Perry, this is a very, I guess, traditional, really one-note depiction of Perry White. He's the gruff editor barking out orders. But other than the fist fight, the thing that really stood out to me that I found hilarious was, in numerous instances, he's, he's barking out these orders, and he's adamant. He's like, you have to have proof for what you write. You got to back up your stories with facts. And of course, that makes sense. That's good advice. That's what they should be doing as journalists. But then in Atom Man, we have this whole sequence, which I actually think this was one of the instances where they mixed up the formula a little bit, and it was good and we'll talk more about this, when Luthor sends Superman to the empty doom. And
that's episode 8 or chapter 8 I'm talking about.
Right. And so he's just sort of appearing kind of like as an apparition, and no one can see him. We'll talk more about it. But what I love about that is, Lois is talking to Perry about Superman's disappearance, and they talk about how Clark is also missing. And Perry's like, well, they're both missing at the same time. Do you think Clark is Superman? And Lois is like, yeah, I've actually thought about that for a while. And Perry goes, all right, well, write it up.
Yeah.
Based on what? The fact that they're both missing at the same time?
And
All
Lois
of those
is like,
journalistic
no.
standards that he was so firm about in the other instances went out the window. I could not believe it.
I just feel like, could you imagine being the audience? Like, they figured it out. Like, oh man.
Yeah, I mean, Lois was so matter of fact about it. She's like, "Oh yeah, I think he is Superman." But just the fact that they had nothing to back it up, other than the perhaps coincidence of them being missing at the same time, I was flabbergasted by that. I won't lie.
You're like, all that integrity, all that stamina.
Yeah, it's like, what the hell, man?
Because like when we meet, Perry's funny in the sense of like, he'll be like, oh yeah, you want a job? Get me this story. Go. And and that's Kent shows up like, I'm trying to get a job. And he gets the story and
he's like, I don't have any experience, but I might have other qualifications that will help. Okay.
Right. You've been on the payroll for hours, Kent. What are you doing? Sitting around?
Yeah.
And then you walk out in the Daily Planet. There's Clark's desk, Jimmy's desk, Lois, and the secretary.
Yeah.
There's something I was gonna say, but there's little things in the serials that are funny, but it's still true to characters that even after these 70 years, plus whatever, you can still look at those characters and see that's Superman, that's Clark, that's Lois, that's Jimmy, that's Perry. I mean, Perry, I think, is the hardest character to nail because we've had J. Jonah Jameson in live action, and you could see where Perry White had some depictions. He falls into that almost. That's kind of why Lane Smith's Perry White's so great. Is it's so different. But I think other than Perry, you can look at these characters and still see true to who they are. It might be some details that you're like, but you can watch their performances and still, you're not scratching your head like that's supposed to be Jimmy.
Exactly. Well, so, we talked about Perry and is played by Pierre Watkin. So Jimmy in this is played by an actor named Tommy Bond. Very different depiction than what we would get later on with Jack Larson in Adventures of Superman. I mean, this Jimmy, as the Cub reporter, he had much more, even though he gets beaten all the time, but he had much more of a toughness to him.
Got some moxie. He's got some sand.
Yeah. And this was, and they talked about this in the featurette, this was definitely earlier on for the character of Jimmy Olsen generally, and I don't know that you necessarily had the personality that we think of hadn't really solidified yet. And I think that would really happen with the Jack Larson performance. So that took a little getting used to, this version of Jimmy, because he's not like the goofy, innocent, silly kid. There's definitely more of a seriousness and a toughness to him. I mean, he's younger and he's like a little sidekick, but they definitely didn't play him for laughs like the way the George Reeves show would.
I just wanted to say that when Adam Man started, I was so happy he didn't have his hat. And then like a beat later, he put the hat back on and I was like, why, Jimmy? Why?
I also have to tell you, and because I don't want to forget this, my favorite moment of the entire viewing, it's never anything you would guess. But we talk about how Jimmy gets knocked out all the time. My favorite moment from any of the serials is in Adam Man when there's an electrical surge at Luthor's hideout. And Luthor's goons and Lois and Jimmy, they're all on their way out, and two guys from the power plant show up. And they're like, oh, we saw this surge or whatever you want to call it. And they want to go in to the hideout to investigate. And Luthor's goons are like, no, get out of here. And they start attacking the workers. Now, based on everything we've seen, you would imagine, like, I assume, like, all right, they're going to knock out these power plant workers and take their uniforms and take their truck. These workers beat the crap out of them. Like, not only did they fight back, like, they started throwing some punches, and I was like, oh, okay, like, they got some fight in them. They won the fight. It was amazing. It was you talk about how repetitive and how formulaic and how predictable. This was a reversal of expectation. I was floored that these power plant workers beat off the goons. It was amazing. That's kind of a poor choice of words, but you know what I mean.
I thought you were going to say when Jimmy when Lois was in the car and she like passed out, and Jimmy runs up and he like tries to jump in the car and he gets hit, and you can clearly see it's a stunt man.
That was amazing. That's up there for me. But no, those power plant workers, they were really, for me, you know, the Superman story and all that, and Lois had great moments, but those two workers, I think, were really the heroes for me. I just couldn't believe it.
Like, we take so much crap every day not doing this. It kind of reminds me the same way, like later in Atom Man, where Superman shows up with the police, like, yeah, Luthor's hideout's over here, we can't get in. Superman's like, come on with me, and they all go walking together, you know, and I'm like,
yeah, no, for sure. So, you know, we mentioned Kirk Alyn. We were talking about Let's talk about his performance. So,
sure.
So overall, I think that Kirk Alyn did a more than admirable job bringing the character to life on screen for the first time. And the featurette, you know, on the DVD talked about his background as an athlete and a dancer. And so in terms of the physicality, I think he brought a lot to it. The biggest and best compliment I want to pay him is that, even more so than George Reeves, he really differentiated the performance between Clark and Superman in terms of his posture and his voice in particular, without making Clark, you know, overly meek and mild.
His face, the way he, I don't want to say contorted, but like moved his face and looked as the two was different. And Jania said one thing that she liked about his Superman was the way he kind of mocked in the face of danger. He always had a very confident, like, haha, kind of like, he never did that, actually, the hands on the hip, but because, you know, she said, like, we were watching, said, you know, he was a dancer. She says, I would have guessed that because of the way his arms are always out, like he's ready to do the move. Or in my mind, like, how did she say it? Dang it. She said I'm paraphrasing. She won't slap me, but when he walked, he didn't really walk into commanding with power. It's very like graceful. He would move it like, you know, one of the biggest is, you go back and watch the first episode where he goes to the train track. He kind of like floats and kind of like leaps more than he walks or runs or stamps. And that was always kind of my issue, is sometimes the movements didn't feel as much powerful in the way he would move as Superman, but he did do a great job of the Clark and the Superman and having a difference. And I wanted to ask you, because I know you had done your deep dive, and I'm just kind of now starting my Golden Age reading, do you feel like this was a very Golden Age comic to screen depiction of the character?
Yeah, I would say so. And
because
I still feel like I've only scratched the surface of the Golden Age, but yeah, I mean, generally I would say so.
I just checked out the Golden Age omnibus from the library. It's like,
nice.
You know, because I always think Golden Age, I always picture George. Because I always, like, he always felt from, you know, and as I go more into this watching, that's more Golden Age Superman. And I was thinking about this, like, you know, is Kirk doing a good job being, like, if I were to read the comic, then watch him, am I feeling like it's the same person?
Well, yeah, I mean, I would be curious to know now after you go through that omnibus. But here's the thing. And look, my preference is for George Reeves, but, you know, the Reeves Clark in Adventures of Superman, he was tough, you know, and it's funny. He would still, you know, his Clark would still pull the, like, oh, like my, you know, whenever danger would break out, it's like, oh, I have to go check something. And he would run away. And that sort of earned him the reputation of, you know, being scared or being, you know, kind of weak-willed. But in terms of how he conducted himself generally, especially in those early seasons, the black and white seasons, you know, he was pretty tough. Whereas, again, there was more of that mild-manneredness to the Kirk Alyn depiction. And yeah, that differentiation was a very pleasant surprise. I wasn't necessarily expecting that. That to me was really the highlight of his performance. Now, with all due respect, like what didn't really work for me, there were a couple of things as both Clark and Superman that just, I guess, you know, were a little bit of a roadblock to my total enjoyment of this. As Superman, and I think this was exacerbated by the fact that footage got reused, like especially him, landing and looking for, where the trouble was. So I recognize it might not necessarily be that he did this every single time, but it felt that way because they were reusing footage. But he always looked bewildered when he entered the scene. And you talked about, people can't see what you were doing, but, you said he didn't have like the hands on his hips the way, the way George Reeves would. His arms always felt like they were in front of him. Right.
Yes. And that's a dancer thing.
Yeah. So like it makes sense. But as you watch it, between the arms in front of him and those eyes like darting back and forth, he just always looked so bewildered as Superman, especially at the beginning when he entered the scene.
Did you ever watch any of the old black and white Universal monster movies, like the Dracula movies?
No.
Or even like Abbott and Costello Meet Dracula?
No.
Frankenstein? The shot of Kirk Alyn when they would zoom in and he was using his X-ray vision, the way they shot reminded me of those scenes where Dracula's like trying to put you in a trance. Like I love the old black and white, 20s and 30s, 40s movies. And because it was the same stock shot of his eyes, like, and his eyes had that bewilderment, that wide, almost like man possessed look. Like,
and look, in fairness, I get it to an extent, right? He's landing on the scene. He's getting the lay of the land. He's taking in what's going on, and he's deciding on a course of action. So I'm not like, that's the thing. I'm not saying like, well, I don't understand this choice at all, but I guess is just not necessarily what I was looking for. And that sort of points to the larger issue that I had with him as Superman. And this is harder to really pinpoint. This is more of like a feel thing.
Mm-hmm. I totally know what you mean.
The costume that both Kirk Alyn and George Reeves wear, they're not entirely dissimilar. They're very, very, very close in terms of the types of costume that they're wearing and in terms of the budget that both, productions were working with, or at least the way it looks on screen. Yet, I have a much easier time believing that George Reeves is Superman than I do Kirk Alyn. Whereas when I watch a lot of these Kirk Alyn scenes, it looks like a guy running around in a costume. Whereas when I look at George Reeves, it's like, oh, that's Superman. And this is the part that, again, I can't necessarily point to anything concrete, but there was just the X factors. There was a certain presence and an innate quality that I saw in George Reeves that I did not really find in here. And like I said, I just kept coming back to this idea that it just looked like a guy in a costume in a way that the George Reeves one didn't.
It's a uniform. Okay. It's his uniform. He says it. And I know exactly what you mean, because in one of the episodes, Clark reveals himself to a scientist that he's Superman. And it's a very weird, awkward scene because he's like, turn off the light. And he goes in the corner and he starts to, take, and you see the shadow of him like taking off his outfit and put, like, you see the cape and he's like, turn it. And then he stands there. You're Superman? He's like, yes. And I'm like, he didn't just, like, ta-da kind of thing. Like,
I know. No, I know exactly what you're talking about. And it was hilarious.
And speaking of uniform, my favorite, I know we're kind of jumping around, but it was I think it was Spider-Woman. I think. Yeah.
Spider Lady. Yeah.
Yeah. Spider Lady is when she has the kryptonite and he's like, I have, how's he word? I have lead lined underneath my uniform. And I was like, that's great, but your face is still exposed.
Oh, that drove me nuts.
And I'm just like,
I know that drove me nuts when at the climax of the first serial, when he is able to overcome the kryptonite in the possession of the Spider Lady by claiming that, yes, he has, lead underneath his costume, but like you said, not over his hands or face. There was something similar with the Luthor serial where Luthor creates synthetic kryptonite and it works on Superman. Cool. But then the next time that they try to use it, Superman, it doesn't affect him. And he's like, well, once it's exposed to air, it loses its effect. It's like, who says who?
Obviously, he figured it out when they were exposed to him and it didn't affect him. And he faked it. Like, oh.
Yeah. So again, some of those contrivances, you just sort of, take it for what it is. But
can we talk about how Arnold Schwarzenegger stole Superman's line? Can we talk about that for a second? When Luthor's banishing him to the doom, he's like, I'll be back. I'll be back.
Yeah.
I'll be back. I'm like, okay, I got it, bro. But I was like, dang it, Terminator, you stole Superman's line.
Well, just like Pa Kent, Eben in this has a line about with great power
Yeah. Oh yeah. I was like, good job there, Ebed and Sarah. And like as I was watching, I was like, wait a minute. Because like in a lot of earlier comics, there's that thin line of he was found taking to a orphan asylum. That's my favorite line, by the way, from the comics. And then the Kents adopted him. And then over time, like it starts to smooth that it's the Kents that find him and take him there, then go back for him, and then the Kents find him and just keep him. So I was like, as I was watching, it's like, okay, does Ebed and Sarah find him and then take him? No, they keep him. They're the Kents. And then that's what sparked my idea. Like, did Jonathan can't ever have a brother? Because I could rationalize in my head that Eben was his brother. Because, was it at one point Clark was adopted from like Martha's sister? They made there was like, I don't remember. It was like where they were trying to hide who Clark, like. Yeah,
there have been versions like that where they're like, oh, we'll just say this is your, I don't know if it was sister or cousin. Like we'll say this was a relative's child. So there definitely have been versions like that. But I want to go back to their telling of the origin. But the last thing I wanted to say just about the performance was with Kirk Alyn as Clark. I liked his Clark overall, but especially early on, there was, and I don't know what the best word is to describe it. I don't know, like an impishness to his Clark.
I would say that there's like a campness at times. Like, oh yeah,
yeah, didn't really like that so much. So
because it felt like some of the ways he would react as Clark would translate to the way he would act as Superman. Just with Superman, it was a little bit more confidence behind it, if that makes sense, of like the sarcastic tone of, like I said, like how he would kind of laugh in danger. Can I point out my favorite thing that I pointed out to Jania was you have a scene almost in every serial of Superman getting shot by the gangsters, bullets bouncing off, but yet the gangsters will get in a fight with Clark and actually land some punches.
Yes.
And nothing was wrong with their hand. Like Clark, I mean, was he rolling with those punches? Was he, having to fake it? Because they're like, psh, psh, psh. And I'm like, you just showed the guy take the bullet, but this guy's fist is going to knock down Clark, and he's not really rolling with I'm like, something's going on here. I'm like,
I know. I noticed that as well. And kind of along those lines of Clark fighting. So in these serials, right, he earns the reputation, especially with Lois, of being this coward who always runs from danger. And yes, there are instances where trouble breaks out and he's like, oh, I'll go get the police. Or when there's the oil field fire and he pretends like, oh, the gas knocked him out and he was unconscious in the car. There are plenty of instances of that. However, there are also instances where he engages in fisticuffs and shows bravery. When the goon who was fighting Perry makes his way into the bullpen, Clark stops him and knocks him out. And then similarly in the Atom Man serial, when, Lois and Clark and I guess Jimmy, they're going to meet with Perry's contact to examine the coin. And anyway, that whole bit of business, Clark is the one, like he's fighting off the goons in that one. So again, not to nitpick, but it just feels like this reputation. Sometimes it's like, come on, I feel like they're being a little overly hard on the guy. He's shown bravery.
And I think it kind of it depends on which serial you're watching. Because there's an evolution. Like my favorite, you're talking about him running away, is when he runs to go change into Superman. And Lois is like, he ducks into like the theater or something.
Yep.
And she's like, Clark, the police aren't over there. Where are you going? And she stops him from becoming, Superman. And I'm like, that was funny because that's when Lois starts to get more into things. And before I forget, I just want to point out my favorite Lois moment is when she's leaving and she tells the secretary to call the police and report her car stolen. And she takes the Daily Planet car and Clark comes out like, hey, I needed that car. She's like, take mine. It's in the alley. And she throws her keys. And then Clark's driving her car and gets pulled over by the police and arrested. And he has to leave jail, go save her as Superman, come back to jail, go back to Clark just for the, and I was like, that is such a Lois Lane move.
Yeah.
Like it put a smile on my face, honestly, because it was like, I don't know. I really liked her Lois Lane because even though it's representative of how a woman would be at the time. Because Jania said when we were watching, she's like, yeah, Lois can't fly the plane because she's a woman and it's 1940s. And I'm like, yeah. Like, I'm kind of like, I'm just like, yeah. But I think she gets some really great moments in the series.
She does. And of course, you know, she would take over the role of Lois from Phyllis Coates in the Adventures of Superman series. Now, I've talked about this before. As much as I enjoy Noel Neill's performance, and she's wonderful as Lois, I am partial to Phyllis Coates because there was.
I'll get back to you on that.
All right, because
I really need to, like, that's part of my journey at the moment, is like, because I had seen, you know, some of Phyllis, but I'm like, I'm gonna watch them so I can really frame it together. I
mean, here's the thing. I think they both work. It's just that the Phyllis Coates iteration, she was a lot tougher. I mean, she was tough as nails, whereas the Neill version was definitely softer and more feminine or daintier, or however you want to put it, but definitely softer. And, you know, watching these serials, again, I really did enjoy her Lois. She brightened up the screen and she brought a lot of energy, and I think that really helped with the proceedings, but she it's a weird thing to complain about, but her Lois in these serials, she's like always smiling. Even I think the one where it was so noticeable was after she had been pushed out of a building and Superman caught her. And she's like just all smiles, like, oh, thanks. And it just felt to me like this does not reflect what what you would probably be going through following a situation like that. So again, I know this might sound like a weird complaint, like she smiled too much, but I don't know, she was just so upbeat, and sometimes it felt like the situation called for something a little bit different.
There was one in Adam Man where, like, what happened? Superman came to save us. Oh, he does that. You know, they're just like, oh, okay. Just another day of being endangered and Superman saved us. Like,
yeah.
I get with that. Like, and then speaking in Adam Man, one thing I know, they started the flying scenes added Lois a couple of times, or someone else, like they actually started. And, you know, I thought about this. There's a reason why we call it computer animation, or CG is like, that was their technique for them. You know, now we have flying scenes that's transitioned with super realistic computer graphics. But, you know, back then they just had hand-drawn animation to do their transitions or whatever, and it worked. And you know, so like it made sense for why they would do it, how they did it at the time and everything. I just wanted to I meant to mention that earlier. Yeah. Just that kind of mindset of, you know, it's still a type of animation to fill in the gaps. Just now our technology, like, could you imagine going to a theater right now, walking in George, Kirk, and Chris and sitting them down and like playing Man of Steel, the Smallville scene?
I know. It's incredible. And, you know, your point is well taken. It's, you know, we still have this assistance today. It just takes a different form, and it looks seamless, as opposed to watching the serials where it very clearly switches to cartoon animation. But I didn't mind that. I really didn't mind it, and I got used to it. I will say that by the time we got to the second serial and they had figured out how to show him physically flying to an extent, I felt like we probably could have ditched the animation at that point, even if that meant we didn't get those longer, more involved flying shots. Like, I actually would have been okay if, you know, you just saw those relatively static torso up shots of him flying and we lost the animation. I would have been okay with that, but in either serial, I didn't mind it. Now, had I been a kid or an adult, maybe even more so, going to see these in the 40s and excited to see Superman flying on screen, might I have felt differently? Yeah, I don't know. Maybe. I don't know how I would have felt in that context.
I'm going to say you would. And here's why. Solomon has a love for Godzilla. Okay. And until recently, we did not know that Jania's uncle, he sat down, it was recently over a break, and he was talking with Solomon. Solomon started talking about Godzilla, and he told Solomon that he was a child about Solomon's age and saw the original Godzilla at the drive-in, and how he was like, engrossed in how it was, just excited and scary and just, oh my gosh, this is. So hearing that story about a kid watching, and Godzilla is what, 54, right? Yeah, sounds right. So then putting that paradigm of thought into what you just said, yeah, I totally think you just would have been blown away and just engulfed in the Superman world. Like, that's Superman. So, taking out those flying shots may have changed, because one of my favorite parts of advancement in, I think it was in Atom Man, is when Superman has the guy in the office and he like throws him out the window and in the air.
Yeah, that was great.
And then Cassie's like, "What? You don't want to tell us? Talk again." And I'm like, wow, that was that was pretty exciting.
Yeah, not unlike the George Reeves version, which we've talked about. This was a very confident, authoritative, decisive Superman. So for those who, don't like the more conflicted, introspective versions that we've gotten in recent times, I mean, this is a very no-nonsense Superman. He usually knows what to do and he goes out and he does it. And like I've said, I like both versions. I think there's room for all those kinds of interpretations. But yeah, this is a very dynamic Superman.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Now, you mentioned a couple of times you're watching this with your wife. What was her take on these generally?
My wife has a great appreciation for classic movies and old film and things. So it's not hard to get that, that appreciation. And she was enjoying it with me. Like, we'd point out, flaws or things like the repetitiveness and then the character. And that's as we were watching it, we talked about Kirk being a dancer. And, I said to her, like, I'm not saying this negatively, but now, like, I've watched enough of this that I can see the Kirk Alyn Superman more fully. And I'm like, I don't like some of what he does. And I can say that without feeling like I'm just trashing it because it's the old thing. I'm like, I understand it. I appreciate what's going on, because on the same thing, I'm liking so much of the fun that I'm getting from Lois. So, I mean, and that's the older Lois. Her and I sit down and, ranked our Superman, our Lois's, and Luthor, because we talked about Luthor more too, because she had previously watched the other when you and I did the other recording, she watched the Luthor with me, and just how there is hints of the businessman, the mad scientist. I recently took the kids to see Rise of Gru, and in a couple of shots I'm like, oh, is that Gru? No, that's Luthor. My wife pointed out the bald cap line. She's like, there it is. And she agreed with me, because she's going to watch some of the George stuff with me as well. It's just, there is something that's a little, I don't want to say off about it, like about, Kirk, but at the same time, like, there's an appreciation for it. And she sat there and one night and she's just kind of watching him and talking with me. And I will say that having her talk with me as I'm watching it made the episodes of that night go much smoother than me trying to do it all by myself. And I love getting her perspective on things, because she always comes with a different perspective and brings up different viewpoints that I might not catch. And it was enjoyable. It made it more enjoyable watching it with her. And that's kind of what I always like to try to do, is include her in some way.
Good. No, I'm glad you were able to share that with her. Yeah. I mean, my wife and I watch all of our shows and movies and stuff together. The stuff that I've been watching for the podcast, it depends. Like, some stuff she'll watch with me, some she won't. These she did not, in part due to just timing. I watched after she went to sleep, but yeah, I can imagine how having a co-pilot would make it go a little bit easier. Yeah. Doing it alone is definitely a little harder.
What we should have done is next time we should, map it up and just pull up FaceTime and be like, all right, let's watch this. I'll be watching on TV and put the laptop right there, the old iPad, and been like, yeah, hey. And then we could just watch it, and that way we make comments as we go and not feel like we're alone.
Yeah. So, and speaking of Luthor, as he's called here.
Yeah. Very hard war.
Yeah. Luthor. So, played by Lyle Talbot, who you've mentioned the Gotham or the Batman serials. I own them too. I've not watched them, but my understanding is he played Gordon in that.
I think so. I I bought them in the $5 bin years ago at Walmart, and I watched one of them one time just to show my wife, and then I put it on the shelf. But it was just one of those, like, because it was both of them on one,
Yes.
set, and just to have, like I said, to call back to, there's the origin, there's the history.
I know. To be honest, originally I figured, I would watch those along with these, but after struggling to get through the Superman serials, I don't think I have this in me, at least now, but hopefully at some point down the line. But as far as Luthor in this, because again, you and I talked about this when we did our Luthor episode a little while ago. And at the time I said that I found Lyle Talbot's Luthor to be very flat. Mm-hmm. And I still stand by that. However, my opinion of his performance and this version of Lex, not Lex, he's not Lex yet, he's still just Luthor, definitely improved watching the entire serial. And
see, I wanted to ask you that, because I had similar thoughts of how much more interesting I found him watching over the whole thing.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. I guess what I originally saw only as flatness, I appreciated more now as a measuredness, or a level of being calculating. Mm-hmm. But it's still interesting to me, because when you look at all those other pre-crisis versions of Luthor that you and I looked at, especially the cartoons, the Filmation and Superpowers, the Superboy show, and of course Gene Hackman in Superman the movie, they all had bigger personalities. Some too big, as we talked about, but they all had, there was just more going on, more personality, more energy. So this Luthor still remains an outlier, but I don't necessarily say that as a bad thing. Like I said, I really did come to appreciate it. And to your point, because we didn't really see a ton of this in just the couple that we watched last time, but watching the whole thing, yeah, you do see the hints of what we would get in the modern times, of the evil businessman, facade that he creates. So it was cool to kind of see that and see some of maybe the earliest seeds of what would become later. And just by way of quick recap, the second serial begins with Luthor's already established as this renegade scientist and Superman's arch nemesis.
That's what I was about to say. I wrote down, because they're like, Luthor, Superman's arch nemesis. I'm like, really? This happened off screen, in between the two serials. I was like, okay. And he's, getting released from prison. And I was just like, because there's definitely a distinction between, if you watch the first one and then the second one. One is Noel Neill's hair is Lois, and the second one is more Lois, like dark, shorter, and everything. But yeah, that threw me. And they were like, arch enemy. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, it's interesting to have something like that transpire, off screen in between serials. But that is where we start, and Luthor is apprehended right at the very beginning of the Atom Man serial. He tries to level a bridge using these sonic waves, and Superman's able to stop it and catches Luthor. And then this crime wave persists while Luthor is locked up, and he's ultimately, now a lot of time passes, which was interesting. They make mention of how much time has passed while Luthor's in prison, but he's ultimately granted parole, in part because he's exchanged information with the authorities and has promised help in combating this crime wave. But when he gets out, he takes over a television station, or he starts a television station.
Yeah.
And I mentioned at the top of this, all of his inventions. I guess the claim to the big one really in this is this teleportation device. And although I don't know, well, I guess that is the most impressive. But in addition to that, he also has this other machine that's sort of, what does he describe it as, a combination of radar and television, where he and his minions can see across great distances through walls.
Yeah.
And capture both video and audio. It's a remarkable achievement.
I mean, this guy was living in, 2022 or more. Because not only that, but the teleporter, the beamer, you have a coin in your hand. And then if you're holding that coin, it's like they have a ray gun thing that locks into it and basically like Star Treks you out of there. And it gets used a lot throughout the series, and it was pretty cool. I will say it got a little overplayed later on, but
well, there's one point where one of the henchmen is captured, and to the public, they think all these guys are working for the Atom Man.
yes,
Right. But of course, actually, it was odd to me. To what extent do you think the serial was trying to make it a surprise that Luthor was Atom Man for the audience?
probably never. The fact that it sounded like Luthor's voice when the Atom Man talked.
Yes. No, I mean, again, certainly watching
But
it.
at the same time, I don't know, because it just felt like, I don't know. It felt like it was Luthor from the beginning. I don't know. Like, that's a really, really good question.
Yeah, I was just curious because, again, certainly for us watching it, it's like, of course it's going to be Luthor. But, you know, when they're in the hideout and he's laying out his plan, he comes out as the Atom Man with this goofy helmet on and the robe and stuff. And, or I don't know if it's at that point, or maybe it's Luthor talking about Atom Man and talking about how, Atom Man is his associate or whatever. Yeah, I was just curious, like, to what extent, especially back in the day, was that meant to be a surprise for the audience? But I can't imagine much of one. But what's funny is with this device that he can use to see through walls and whatnot, he uses it to, he has his goons copy down the codes for the safes at local businesses like dry cleaners.
Yep.
And it's just so funny to me.
Or the Daily Planet, because the Daily Planet had a safe.
Yeah. But it's just like, this guy is running a television station. He's come up with these unbelievable scientific achievements. It's like he's using it to like knock off a dry cleaner safe. I don't know. Not to look too deeply into that, but it was just kind of goofy to me.
It wasn't like there was some part of some bigger plan. But I mean, you know, in the end, we found out he was building a rocket ship.
Yes.
And that all of his, stuff was going to be on his rocket ship, that he was going to leave, or he was going to use his machine to cause earthquakes. And he was, kidnapped Lois. She would be the Eve. And she's like, what are you trying to make? Some sort of Noah's Ark? Applesauce. And it was just weird, because I'm like, you have all this stuff you've invented that you're, like you said, you're knocking over, like, they're inside the movie or the television truck, and they're having, like, later on, there's a plot, the trick. Lois gets fired from the Daily Planet. She goes to work for Luthor. She's interviewing people on the street. And while she's doing that, the truck is positioned, watching the safe, while another group of thugs go in and rob the place. And I just love how she's like, hey, do you want to be interviewed? Do you want to be interviewed? Not about any subject, but just, do you want to be on TV? Like,
right.
But it was interesting, just the whole, like I said, like, after a while, sometimes you're like, what is going on? Because so many things are just repetitive. And then, the thugs all look the same, just dudes in suits. Not that distinction. But I will say the one episode that kind of popped for Out of Atom Man is when Luthor recants and retells us the origin of Superman, and all about Jor-El and all about Krypton. And I'm like, how does he know this? And then he says, someone coded these messages that Jor-El sent, and only I could decipher them. And I was like, okay, I'll go with it. But I'm sitting there watching this like, oh, okay. Luthor knows all about Krypton, huh?
Yeah, believe me, that jumped out at me too. So that's in the episode where he's creating his synthetic kryptonite, and basically he's got a few minutes that he has to wait while the kryptonite is
They're like, we don't have to film anymore. We'll just use old footage. We're good.
Yeah, so it shows us the footage from the first chapter of the first serial, the destruction of Krypton. And rather than the original narrator's voice, we have Luthor now, recounting what happened. And I mean, word for word, it's word for word. So they didn't have to come up with a new script either. And I had the same thought. It's like, how would he possibly know any of this? I will say, I give them credit for at least attempting an explanation. It's not a good one.
No, but
but because they could have just left it as like he just knew. So I appreciated that they at least put something out there. But it also makes me think too. I thought one of the more interesting parts of the first serial was when Superman encounters kryptonite for the first time, right? Like this meteor falls, and this Professor Leeds, I think, has it, and he's going to study it, and Clark goes to get the story, and immediately passes out. What did make me laugh about that? The professor like barely touches Clark and is very quick to pronounce him dead. He's like feels it for like a second, and then he's like, "I need the coroner up here. Clark Kent just died."
Yep.
But as you were explaining earlier, right? Clark eventually comes to, and he does reveal his secret to Professor Leeds.
Hold on. So Professor Leeds shuts the box of kryptonites in. Clark comes to, and then he's like, "Go ahead, open that again. I got to see something." And he opens again. He falls down again. He's like, "Yes, just as I suspected." And I was like, "Okay,
I know
that hurt. Do it again."
But what's interesting is that Professor Leeds, clearly has knowledge of this planet Krypton out there. And at that point, Superman says, because this, he reveals his identity. He's like, "Oh, I thought I might be from Krypton."
Now, in my studies recently, when I was talking about the destruction of Krypton, I was digging in. I wish I would have had my notes. Now I can't remember. At one point, Krypton was in our galaxy, but like on the opposite far side of our own galaxy, like past Pluto. Not was it in our solar system or just right? It was in our galaxy. It was closer. So it was like a planet that maybe they had known of. And I can't remember where that was now. Dang it. Because I found that interesting. Just the idea that Krypton's much closer than what we later would perceive it to be.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. The fact that this scientist and presumably others knew of Krypton and knew of its destruction, and the fact that Superman himself suspected he might be from there, like that really took me by surprise. But yeah, I guess to your point, in other iterations, I guess more is known about the planet, and even in Adventures of Superman, you'll see that when you get there. But when they introduce kryptonite, I believe that whatever scientist is analyzing, it's been a while since I watched that episode, but speculates that it's from the planet Krypton. It's like, so it's known, I guess in certain iterations of the story, but yeah, it definitely took me by surprise.
It also, because if you go back to one thing that I don't say have a problem with, but is sometimes when watching the older Superman properties is remembering what powers does he have and what doesn't he have. Because, my favorite is always heat vision.
No heat vision in these serials.
No heat fit until the 61 Superman 145 or 245. Something 45 introduced officially heat vision. Before it was like a form of X-ray vision, but it was heat vision. And then no super breath, So it's always one of those things to try to keep in my mind, like, all right, what can he do? And it's neat that they did the flying compared to just the leaping and stuff that we have seen in the comics and stuff before. So that's always an interesting kind of thought,
Well, it's funny too when you talk about the powers, because yes, we see a lot of X-ray vision and super hearing and strength and flight in the serials. Speed is a little nebulous though, because so there are a couple of scenes that come to mind where Superman is tying up the bad guys, and they speed up the footage. So it looks like he's doing it faster, and then they'll cut to Lois or Jimmy, and you'll see their eyes like darting up and down as they're watching Superman do it. So it's conveying that like he's doing this very fast. But then there are at least a couple of instances where Superman, not Clark, but Superman is chasing after the bad guys, and he's like running at a normal human speed. So there's that. And then going back to what you were saying before, when he changes from Clark into Superman, I feel like they needed to cut away sooner, because it's like you just see him like start to take off all his clothes, but at a normal speed, and it just it plays as kind of goofy.
Well, like the footage they establish is he's in the Daily Planet. He goes into a closet, shuts the door. He opens his jacket, steps behind a filing cabinet, and then like beat comes out as Superman, and then takes off out the window. And then later the reestablishing footage is animated Superman flies in the window. He lands, goes behind the filing cabinet, then comes out, rebuttons that one part of his suit and goes out. And and then we had this scene where he tells Dr. Leeds, and we see the shadow of him like changing. And I don't know about you, but if I'm with a man I kind of just met, and he's like, "Hey, turn the light off," and he starts like undressing, I'm gonna be a little like, but odd.
It was, like, it's funny. This is just a brief tangent, but hopefully we'll get a laugh out of it. So, in my previous job in the admissions office, this is going back a few years, but we would get like polo shirts for students who gave tours for us, stuff like that. And I remember we gave one to one of our students, and we were in the middle of our office suite there, and we gave him the shirt. And I'm not joking, the men's room was like a few steps away. Yet he proceeds in the middle of this office. We're all just standing there. He just takes his shirt off, no undershirt, no t-shirt. He just takes his shirt off and tries on this polo shirt. And it's just like, what are you doing?
Right.
So some people, different circumstances, but I always thought of that. It's just like, it was so baffling to me. It's like, come on, like this is not the setting. And in any event,
maybe he was just he grew up playing shirts versus skins a lot. And he's like, all right.
Yeah, maybe. But yeah, the scene with the doctor was funny. Another personal story that it made me think of, when I was little, there was another little kid in our apartment building, where we lived for a few years, and we used to have play dates and stuff. And this was when, I don't know, maybe I was 6 and he was 4. I don't know. But I used to tell him that I was a Power Ranger.
Of course, that's how you introduce yourself.
Of course, that's what you do.
You told him your color and everything.
Yeah, but I was like, I'm a Power Ranger and I could teleport. I was like, I could teleport, but I would make him like turn around. I was like, you have to turn around, and then I'll teleport, and then I would just run to the other room. But yeah,
close your eyes.
That scene just kind of had the air of it. It was like, I'm Superman. It's like, I'll show you. And it turns off the light and he takes off the clothes. And then the funniest thing was the professor was like, okay, use your X-ray vision and see through this door. And he can't do it. But it turns out there was, lead paint or whatever. But it was funny.
Which would be a lot more common back then than it is now.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, for sure. But the fact that they utilized kryptonite and that Superman revealed his identity, that felt kind of big to me. And that was, again, one of those instances where I felt like, okay, like we're doing something interesting here.
That's how I felt, in Atom Man, when they have the whole Clark as Superman and Lois refuses. And then we have a scene where Jimmy goes out of the office to a payphone, calls Perry, voice impersonates Clark, that I'm onto a big story. Gotta go. Like the most generic talk ever. To kind of throw Perry off this trail, because Lois is trying to protect the integrity of both Superman and Clark. And I thought that was, like you were saying, like Atom Man definitely shows some character development. And there's little things in the relationship between Clark and Jimmy and Lois and Clark, then the three of them, that just kind of makes you like the characters more. Like you said, the serials are very plot driven. There's not a lot of time. Like you got to go from A to B to C to get ready for, B of the next episode. So there wasn't a lot of time for that, but Atom Man made that time a little bit more and kind of slowed down some elements of the story beats. And it made it a little bit more enjoyable. Because like you were saying, where Clark gets banished to the Great Doom, and he's like vibrating. What was one time? This is different. But he is typing like a ghost on Lois's typewriter, and she's like, "It's a message from Superman." And we see this really cool like effect of showing Superman there. But it made me think of earlier where Luthor thinks he banishes him or whatever, and he's like, "No, I just vibrated so fast that it looked like I was invisible." I was like, "What are you, the Flash now?" But
yeah, no, I'm with you on that. But yeah, speaking of the empty doom, like that was probably the most intrigued that I was watching this, because it was challenging Superman in a different way. It wasn't just, oh, is he going to save Lois or Jimmy from this death trap? It's Superman himself is in danger. He's been forced into this main arc chamber that Luthor uses to disperse his atoms into the empty doom. Sort of, if I was, fans, kind of talking about this online and equating this to like an early version of the Phantom Zone. And it, definitely has that feel to it, which is cool. So again, just seeing, like early seeds of what might come later. But yeah, and then the fact that, like you said, he's appearing as this apparition, but no one can see him, and he's punching the keys on Lois's keyboard. And I liked that, he really had to use his wits, right? And so he comes up with this plan to have the Daily Planet put out the story that Superman's alive and he's going to make an appearance. And it, and they use, footage from the serials, right? But they news footage of Superman, and they broadcast it on TV to throw Lex off and Luthor off, and make him think that, he assumes it's a trick, but he's not positive, right? So he has to open up this channel again and send one of his guys up to check. And that's what Superman uses to ride back down to Earth. Like, it was a cool sequence of events.
Yes, it was. It was. And also later, at one point where I can't remember how they got there, because some of it didn't make sense of how but let Luthor. So you got me doing it.
I know, I'm sorry.
he tells him, it's like, that one of those levers will save and bring Superman back, or one won't. Are you willing to take the gamble? He says it to Lois and Jimmy, and it was like they are now responsible for saving, Superman. Like, it just changed it up a little bit to where he wasn't the one always saving them, and it made it more enjoyable. It felt more Superman-y, like having Luthor and like what was going on compared to the Spider Lady.
Yes. Well, the one thing though that was funny with Luthor and the choice that he gives Lois with the levers is, again, I nitpicking, but it's like, why, if this is your arch enemy and you have him where you want him, why would you not flip the lever that will seal his fate forever? Why would you even make this a possibility? In any event, I agree. Having not just a recognizable villain, but as we've been talking about in prior episodes, Superman's ultimate opponent, his arch enemy, as the villain for the second serial, definitely gave it added weight and packed more of a punch than, and no disrespect to the Spider Lady, but that's not a villain necessarily that I would be clamoring to see again.
It would be interesting to do like a show, or like, I always think like I have a story like in mind where I've watched these different things and like characters that appear like the Spider Lady or Mason on Lois and Clark that only appear like keeping these lists of these characters and then doing a Superman story that involves all these characters that were created for certain aspects. Like, it would be neat to bring in, say, the Spider Lady on an episode of Superman and Lois, or a new animated show, My Adventures with Superman, that's coming down the pipeline, something like that, to just kind of winks, nods to what's come before that sometimes gets lost in translation. And we've talked about before, it's like, will I go back to these? Probably I'll never sit down and watch them all again. Will I maybe watch a chapter or something to show some of what we discussed? Probably, like, just to kind of, especially because I know eventually we're going to do an episode probably on the serials. It's on my forever to-do list, but sometimes it's a daunting task if someone's not up for the task.
Yeah, honestly, I appreciate you taking this on. I'm with you. I don't know. I don't think I would ever sit down and watch all of these again unless, like, my son at some point gets curious about it. Then I would.
Well, yeah. Same thing here.
Otherwise, though, I don't think I would ever seek these out. But as far as you brought this up earlier, as far as what we would recommend to fellow Superman fans who might be listening to this and who maybe are not familiar with these, have never watched them. Yeah, at a minimum, I would say watch the beginning of the first serial, see the origin.
Yes.
Watch the last chapter or two of the first serial, and then as far as the second serial, I would probably say to watch maybe the first and last, and the middle ones, that chapter 8 that we've been talking about with the empty doom. Like those are I think the strongest ones, and that's where maybe the serial repetitive format can work to your benefit, because you won't be so lost. You'll have missed some of the plot of. I mean, essentially in each chapter, whether it's Spider Lady or Luthor, there's something that they're trying to get their hands on. Usually something like that.
It gets extremely repetitive to where, like I said, I'm taking notes and I got lost because I'm like, wait, what is it this time? Like, what happened here? Like, how did you get here in the story?
Yeah.
Like, if I revisit these, would probably do what I should have done is start doing these like reviews as backups in each episode.
Yeah.
So where like each week we would watch one and talk about, at the end of the episode, that'd probably be something to do down the line, like in another year or 5.
As far as nods to other Superman adaptations, a la the radio show and the Fleischer cartoon, we do get the bit where Clark is changing into Superman, and we hear him think it rather than actually see him say it, I believe. But this is a job for Superman, so we do get that. That was a nice touch. I see you're bringing something over.
Yeah. I just because when the serial starts for Superman versus Atom Man, it says based on the radio show, and I have the Superman versus Atom Man radio show script.
Oh, nice.
So I think
it's very different, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I was going to bring up is like, even though like the Atom Man is based on the script, and I told Jania, I was like, you know what? I might, if do an episode or something where I kind of do through the script and kind of talk about the script versus the produced serial. And I think it was kind of neat because it's the first Superman storyline translated from one medium to another. So
yeah.
I just wanted to bring that up before I forgot.
Yeah, no, that is cool. Just a quick side note. I never realized there were such extensive country roads, like right outside Metropolis. They get a lot of play. We got a lot of car chases out on those trails there.
Yeah. Like I told you, the palm trees in Kansas is what I loved. I always thought it was funny. They're like, Clark, one day you're going to be a man and you'll have to go out. Okay. Soon Clark's foster parents both died. So Clark left home. I'm like,
that was the last big thing on my list, kind of bringing it all the way back to the beginning of the telling of the origin here. And, I appreciated what they attempted to do with Krypton. I think given the limitations, they could have just skipped over it, but they brought us to Krypton.
We meet Jor-El, Lara, the council.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. It hits all of those fundamental beats are there, that Jor-El knows of this impending doom and no one will heed his warnings. And he and Lara make this desperate gamble to save their son. It's all there. It's very rudimentary, but it's there. Even in terms of Krypton itself, you see apparently the outer edges of the planet are very rugged, very, mountains and rock and very rocky. And then we have this advanced main city that's just rendered via a portrait, an illustration. And then we go into the Science Council. But again, like those main beats are there, and we have Eben and Sarah finding him. And like you said, we jettison all the orphanage business. They just take Clark home, and then you see him as he's aging. But then my favorite, funniest part of the origin is points to what you just brought up, where we cut to now Kirk Alyn as Clark. So he's grown to adulthood and
wearing a suit.
He's sitting in the Kent living room wearing his full suit and glasses, reading. And Sarah nudges Eben. This is my favorite part of the whole thing. And is basically like, all right, talk to him. Like, yeah, talk to this kid. And so, Eben gives him this whole speech about using your powers, and she gives him the costume.
Uniform.
Uniform. And then this was the funniest thing about it was, as the narration tells us, it's like they passed not soon after. So it's like they give him this whole speech and he doesn't take their words to heart, apparently. He waits until they've died. It was so odd to me.
it's so odd because if you drop the narration, it looks like they hand it to him and then he walked out the front door to head to Metropolis.
Yes.
He's wearing the same suit. Okay. But when you throw in the narration, it's like, and soon they died. So they died that night. Like he's wearing the same outfit, and I know the times and people's clothes, whatever. But it feels weird. And then what I find interesting is the similar beats to that versus the pilot for the Adventures of Superman as well.
Yeah.
Of just, but yeah, it like, I like that we see like Clark in 3 phases. Well, 4, I guess. You see an infant that they find. Then he's a little bit older pulling the like mule cart. Then you have him finding Sarah's watch in the hay. And then you have when the electrical wires fall during the tornado that he goes and saves Eben and then drives home.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you have Kirk Alyn. So the first episode really does a lot to establish everything. And that's why I think you should always at least watch the first 2, because it ends like basically with, oh no, trouble's coming. And it's like, boom, here's Superman. And then it's like cliffhanger. So you don't really get to see him be Superman in the first chapter.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things that lulled me into a false sense of security, is that those first couple, they move and they're telling the origin. And then when you realize the pattern that we've fallen into, it's like, oh, okay, I get it now. But yeah, those early chapters are definitely exciting. And you see Clark arrive in Metropolis and he doesn't even know any newspapers. He just goes to the cab driver. Like, take me to a newspaper. He's like, which one? Well, what do you think?
Daily Planet's pretty big.
Yeah, we'll go with that. And then, he makes his public debut and his saves and everything. And it was interesting to me how quickly the government comes to trust him. They call on him to guard this reducer ray that, the Spider Lady is going to be after. But
it goes to like Congress or congressman or Washington, D.C.
I mean, maybe a little bit of time passed, but you don't get the sense that much time passed. And yeah, they're really right on board with Superman. Again, a different time. And it's just funny given the more modern stories where, you've seen a more conflicted response, to say the least. This was a government and a public who were just all on board with Superman right away.
It was interesting. And even the depictions are where it's like they would call the newspaper, then call the police.
I clocked that too. Yep.
Or they would take the guy to like the Daily Planet, call the chief of police, have him pick him up. Why not take him to the police and then have, the newspaper people meet him at the police station, not take the armed thug to the Daily Planet, then have Perry call the police. Like that, I was like, okay, all right. You're just trying to save on sets. Like,
yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the real answer, but I think it also speaks to just the position of prominence that the Daily Planet and Perry in particular occupied. Different time.
You could even break it down, the importance of the reporter, the news, the paper.
Yeah. What
that signified, the level of distinguishment and prominence that actually brought, like what that meant, being the one that brings the truth, the news or whatever, to people, compared to how journalism has been so obscured over the past, I don't know, 10, we'll say 10 years, since, Twitter and Facebook and everything exploded to where we put things out there. It shows more of what that role was. And if you sit back and think for a minute, how much more important Lois is. Like, I don't know if you watched, there's an episode of Jupiter's Legacy that when Netflix did Jupiter's Legacy, last year, 2000, I don't remember time. But there's a flashback where one of the characters is working like at a newspaper and it's a female, and all the crap that she's given for being a woman. And I think back, like, that's how it would have been. Like, Lois would have had a hard time. So she had to be even better of a reporter. And I think it makes the character that much stronger.
Yeah. Oh, well said. Well, listen, I think that was pretty much everything that I wanted to hit on about these. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you wanted to get to?
I mean, there's all kinds of like little things. If we had to go chapter by chapter, I have notes of just some of the puns, some of the just little things like we've mentioned. But I think we've hit the big stuff. There'll probably be other things that filter into conversations because there's like little funny details that happen. But yeah, I think we've got it.
Right on. Yeah. All in all, I'm glad to say I've now closed that gap in my fandom. And, I know we and me in particular, bagged on a lot of aspects of this, but like I said, I really do attribute a lot of that to just the nature of the serial, not even anything that this serial did in particular. And also to the comparisons to the George Reeves show. And I think tying this all together, the fact that I think we accurately, said that, this is a gap or a blind spot for a lot of Superman fans. And I think the George Reeves show probably accounts for that because it was on television. It was in people's living rooms, not just during that initial run, but for decades after in syndication. And it became part of people's routines and was so ingrained as opposed to these more fleeting serials. And I do think, in a lot of respects, the Adventures of Superman did a lot of things better. But even that aside, I just think the presence that it had, it usurped the place that maybe the Kirk Alyn serials would have occupied, but they still deserve their place in the canon. And I some of my frustrations with watching it aside, I am glad that I watched it. I'm glad that I now have this familiarity. I know what these are about now. So this was a worthwhile viewing project for me in the end.
Yeah. I agree with everything you just, you stated. And I mean, how many shows of comic book based stuff do we like that there was one before it or something before it that helped pave the way, craft the character? They did these serials and you can say they took back and was like, okay, what worked, what didn't, how can we change this? Even from the mechanics of the flying, how do we do? And then the George show shows up and, you got to start somewhere. It's just like, go back and watch. I don't know, but I was just thinking like, now I'm relatively how close this Kirk, Adam Man Superman, 1950, Superman the Mole Man, 51, The Adventure of Superman, 52. That is a short period of time. I mean, that's great if you're a Superman fan, you're getting, but for that turnaround, there's not a huge gap there's really not a gap at all, honestly.
No, that's very true. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm grateful for it, if for no other reason than it paved the way for Adventures of Superman. And look, you continue to see examples of this, as Smallville fans, right? I don't know that the Arrowverse shows would have unfolded the way they did from a creative or especially technical standpoint, had it not been for all of the groundwork laid by Smallville, right, prior. So yeah, these things, they kind of build on each other. Although, of course, I would still take Smallville over Arrowverse any day. But anyway, that's a separate conversation.
But that is, you're right. It is a separate conversation. But it's always interesting because, you look back at some of the Arrowverse, like the first season of Flash. It's amazing. It is awesome. But then you go on for so long, and if you don't have the right people behind it kind of focusing, it gets, especially with Arrow, like it just.
For sure. But in any event, I think with the Kirk Alyn serials, I mean, this is, one of the earliest examples, right, of one adaptation sort of laying the groundwork for what's to come. So, audience, I hope you enjoyed this look at the Kirk Alyn movie serials. Tyler, thank you so much for joining me, and I hope that everyone will check out the KRYPTON Report podcast on all major podcast platforms, correct?
Yes, sir. And you can find me, Tyler, at JTY Patrick, my personal Twitter, or at KRYPTON Report on Twitter and Facebook, Instagram. Yeah.
All right. Excellent. Well, thank you, my friend. Thank you, audience. I always appreciate you tuning in. We will be back next week with an all new episode. Until then, remember, it's about what you do. It's about action. Join the conversation by becoming part of the Flat Squirrel Podcast Network Facebook group. like the Digging for Kryptonite Facebook page, and follow us on Instagram at Digging for Kryptonite Pod and on Twitter at Digging for KR Pod. Also, be sure to visit FlatSquirrelProductions.com for more film and podcast projects, including My Comic Shop History and My Comic Shop Country. Thank you.